Hello, friends. We are so glad that you are coming back and checking out our new episode of FASD Collective Shift That Work, where we talk about survival, success, and everything in between. This time, we are tackling the conversation of back to school. So many of us as FASD caregivers can be in a really tough place when it comes to school. And we're just trying to throw out some ideas, some tips, some tricks, and just kind of level out with you. And hopefully you can relate to some of this. If you've got some really great tips for going back to school, we'd love for you to share them in our comment section. And we're just going to jump right on into these suggestions and ideas and things that might make going back to school a little bit less hard. So one of the things that I did for my kiddo when, especially during elementary school, was, you go to orientation and you go in to meet the teacher day and all of the fun, and all of the parents want to talk about how special and unique and excited their student is for joining this new, bright, fun, busy, probably visually overstimulating classroom. And, we learned really quick that my kiddo needed a more in-depth conversation than was appropriate in that setting. So I got this really great idea. And I started at back to school time, I would grab an extra folder. And in this folder, I would put a document that I created. And it was kind of just having this really cute, fun picture of my kiddo. And it would say, these are some things about me that are really great and things that I'm going to do well for you in your classroom. And then on the other side, it would say, these may be some things that I have a hard time with. Teachers have lots of students. If they're in an inclusion classroom or a general education setting, they may not have an IEP or a 504 plan. So there may not be any kind of specific instructions coming to help that next teacher support the student in the classroom. And so I always felt like this was a little tidbit of synopsis of the kiddo. Let's talk in a couple of weeks, right? When things settle down and you learn that maybe we need to have another chat. One of the other things that I loved doing was including a little thin book about FASD. I had typically included the book Trying Differently Rather Than Harder by Diane Melvin. That book has recently been rewritten and updated, which I love because it also includes other kind of neurodiversities. There's another book that's come out recently with Crash Course to FASD. I have not had a chance to dive into that one yet, but that may be another option. Or if you've got just something that would be helpful, bite size for these teachers to be able to get some information with, like that for us was a really great tool. So we would also include things like overlapping characteristics or something that I would come across. Who knows what the flyer of the year was that time, but it was always just trying to give the teacher a way to be able to associate my kiddo, his strengths, and then his brain-based challenges and what those might look like in the classroom. So I actually got some really great feedback from one of his teachers one year who read the book and told me that she really appreciated all of the information that was in the folder because it helped her have that snapshot before the school year was getting started. So that was just one of the things that worked for us, and maybe that will be a great tool for you as well. Rosemary, what about you? You had two kiddos going through school. Tell us your tips.
Hi, everybody. Our experience at school was completely different for each child. I have two, they're young adults now. And they presented completely different challenges and had different outcomes along the way. I would say that school was probably the number one most difficult aspect I had to deal with before I knew about FASD as their diagnosis, and even after, because there's so few folks in the school districts that were FASD formed. It's getting better. My kids are in their 20s now. However, it's still a huge challenge that they know about other disabilities, but very little about one that affects pretty much one child in every classroom. So I'm going to talk about like little practical things that make it a little smoother, because some of the IEP stuff is really difficult and challenging, but these are easy things that can be done. I would say that if you've taken your children or allowed them to go off their school schedule and routine, meaning the bedtimes Even if you're not going to school, start practicing getting that backpack packed up and go back to that school routine as quickly as possible, like at the end of July at the latest. And it might even be helpful to consider for next summer that you stay on your school schedule regardless, because going off and getting that casual time and then having their brains rewire back to more stringent requirements can be extremely, let's say, nuclear meltdown level. So let's avoid the nuclear meltdowns and think about maybe sticking as close as you can to the schedule. And another thing is, particularly when they're transitioning from elementary to middle and middle to high, but mostly the middle school, they're going from one classroom and, knowing where the library, cafeteria, and the PE room is. Then they're going to a school where they have to learn 5 or 6 locations, many, many more bathrooms, all the things, where the one nurse's office is in the very far end of the building. So although most schools nowadays have a back to school before school starts where the kids can go meet the teachers and walk the route, uh, I always got either special permission to go into these schools and work on the route and practice it a number of times to help her, particularly my daughter, remember, like landmarks along the way to help her try to remember and at least feel comfortable. Otherwise, it's like sending them to a foreign country, and it can be extremely overwhelming getting to deal with 5 new teachers plus not know where the heck you are. I used the ESE, it was always offered, or the extended school year, excuse me, during those transition summers, mostly so they could learn the new routines in the new school. And then we did camps that kept them on schedule the rest of the year because I was working full-time parent. And those are two of the things that I found to be the most helpful is get permission, even if you have to have somebody walk with you, just so that your child can learn. Especially, I know it sounds silly, but where are all the bathrooms? Because we don't want to find out the hard way that they can't remember, and be mortified because adolescence is such a hard time to begin with. So those are my little back to school easy tips that most people can easily follow.
So good, Rosemary. Thank you. Pam, what about you guys?
So I would say school for us was such a nightmare that I still feel pretty traumatized about it. And I hate talking about school. Um, One of the first thing that comes to mind is you and Rosemary were both talking, and even thinking of Rosemary's 2 children having 2 different experiences. Each child with FASD is going to have very specific and unique needs. And so I just thought that was really interesting to hear that. You can hear that in even the accommodations they needed. Because my son understands, like, he has we call it GPA instead of GPS because he can find anything. So he wouldn't get lost at school, but he definitely needed different supports. Um, it was a lot of my advocating. Sometimes the advocating felt like fighting, and sometimes it felt awful. And I had advocates help me even fight for my son's rights. Um, so the tips I would say for back to school is listen to your gut. you know, um, find out what you really want to fight for. So my son's 20, and when we were coming up in the school system, there weren't as many wonderful resources out as there are now. Like now we have snippets of FASD ambassadors like Jeff Noble or Nate Sheets, where there's videos you can send to a teacher to kind of explain quickly what FASD is. We didn't come up with those resources. So I love the idea that Jen had of sharing a little bit here and there. Um, I've I had to put a lot of thought into accepting life on life's terms. Like my son was chronically struggling with math. And so I realized very quickly we are not going to be fighting to make sure he learns this. I think sometimes parents feel like they have to advocate so that their kids will learn the things and that they won't miss out on any of these very important lessons. But I decided to go a different route and like who needs to know how to spell? You know, I mean, there's autocorrect. Now there's AI. Like some of these traditional skills that feel so important weren't worth fighting for me. So we took those off the table. And I would tell the school, I don't care. I would like for him to know how to use a calculator and don't do fractions, no decimals. We don't care about that. We're not doing algebra. So we really tried to, because we wanted to lessen the stress of school, because stress at school translates into epic meltdowns at home. When we ask the kids to do more than they can, or maybe they can do it, but there's so much else going on. So like we would always have all of the wrath at home and everything was fine at school. So I feel like I'm rambling and I'm sorry if I hope the audience is still with me. I promise there's a way out. Um, I also would recommend written schedules. It's like I was always advocating to have a written schedule on my son's desk. And if you couldn't understand, if he's too young to understand to read, it would be a picture schedule. So even when he was very young, I had a picture schedule that I used to get him out of the car after we got home from school. And we would go straight from the car to our swing set because that was sensory calming for him. So we could just swing. Um, School's just hard, man. It's hard. The best thing we did is when we moved to Florida, we had choices of school. Where I lived before, we did not have any choices. So we came to this wonderful promised land with schools of choice and quickly learned that he was not at grade level and he was not going to be at grade level. So we applied for the Step Up for Students Gardner Scholarship. It changes names often. I don't know what the name is today, but I'm sure one of you two do. We applied for that scholarship and we got it. And we were able to find a school that focused on kids mainly with autism, but they took my little lamb in and he really thrived there for a number of years. And when that quit working, we found another school that was very specific for kids with special needs. That's the best thing we've ever done. It took so much stress off and he was able to learn in an environment that worked for him. So those would be my tips. But also the last tip would be like, you know what? Sometimes you have to fight. Like I hired two advocates it was the best thing I ever did because they taught me what the law was. And we do have two advocates on our team. I'm looking at one of them right now who can also help teach our families what is the law. So we do have a school advocacy program within our FASD clinic. And then if you need help above and beyond what we can provide, we can guide you in that direction.
What a great little segue there, Pam. So yes, if you're watching this from Florida, please know that the Florida Center for Early Childhood does have some education navigation support within our FASD team, and we would love to just help you out and give you some tips. Also, I just want to leave some space in that, Pam kind of touched on this. Our kiddos and school experiences can be really challenging. And what can make it even more challenging is when you don't have a community or a friend or someone who can walk this journey with you, who understands what our version of challenging might look like, right? Because our kiddos don't always have an intellectual disability. They don't always have behavioral needs. And like Pam mentioned, it can be along this big giant spectrum of what their brain-based symptoms look like. So we encourage you to find a support group, find your tribe, find your people. Again, if you're in Florida, we've got a wonderful support group. We have a private Facebook page, and actually that Facebook page is open to anybody who would like to join us. And if you're not in Florida, I encourage you to check out FASD United. They have a family navigator program, and it would be wonderful for you to just check and see if there's any other local resources in your area. But you don't have to do this journey alone. And that's kind of why we started our FASD collective here, where we talk about our experiences and the shifts that help us get from the really tough places in the trenches to also being able to have some success stories to share. So with that, we hope you've got a great little tip to help you out with back to school, and we'll see you next time.